Really?
Hey, sorry I'm late. It's just like this new schedule's totally confusing.
Order the double cheese and sausage.
Right here, dude.
Fast Times at Ridgemont High, 1982, directed by Amy Heckerling and written by Cameron Crowe, became one of the defining teen comedies of the 1980s.
They sold their bodies to medicine for money. About $30, I think?
25.
Based on Crowe's undercover reporting at a California high school, the film launched the careers of Sean Penn, Jason Leigh, Forrest Whitaker, and Nicolas Cage. Though not an instant hit, it grew into a cult classic that captured the awkward, funny, and often shocking reality of teenage life.
No towels, man.
Here are 20 shocking facts you didn't know about Fast Times at Ridgemont High, 1982. Number 1. Fast Times at Ridgemont High began as a non-fiction book. Before it was a movie, Fast Times at Ridgemont High was a book based on real teenage life. Cameron Crowe, then a young freelance writer for Rolling Stone, pitched the idea of going undercover at a high school to capture the authentic voices and experiences of American teens.
No eating in this class. You get used to doing your own business on your own time.
With the school administration's cooperation, Crowe enrolled at Claremont High School in San Diego under an assumed name, attending classes, making friends, and observing student life for nearly a year. The result was his 1981 book, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, a true story, which detailed the highs and lows of adolescence in candid detail. Just 1 year later, Hollywood adapted it into the now classic film. Crowe's experiment in immersive journalism gave the movie its authentic edge, grounding the comedy in real stories and real characters. Number 2. The real rat became a computer guru. Mark the Rat Ratner, played by Brian Backer, was one of the more awkward but endearing characters in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Like many of the film's characters, he was based on a real student Cameron Crowe met during his undercover year at Claremont High.
Would you do me a favor? Just borrow your mom's car, drive to my house, get my wallet, and bring it back here.
The real-life inspiration for Rat didn't stay in the world of teenage crushes and mall jobs, though. He went on to find success in the technology industry. After graduation, he built a career as a respected computer guru, becoming the kind of savvy professional who would have seemed light years away from the shy teen depicted on screen. It's a reminder of how much of the film came from real people whose lives continued long after Crowe turned them into unforgettable high school archetypes. Number 3. Fast Times was Amy Heckerling's directorial debut. When Fast Times at Ridgemont High hit theaters in 1982, it didn't just launch the careers of several actors. It also introduced a new voice behind the camera. The film marked the feature directorial debut of Amy Heckerling, who had previously studied at NYU's Tisch School of the Arts and directed short films. Producer Art Linson took a chance on her, impressed by her sharp sense of humor and ability to capture the rhythms of teenage life. Heckerling's eye for detail and her balance of comedy and realism helped turn Cameron Crowe's script into something more than just another teen comedy. Her success with Fast Times paved the way for a long career, including Clueless, 1995, another teen classic. Starting with this debut, Heckerling carved out her place as one of the most influential female directors of her generation. Number 4. Jason Leigh went undercover for the role. Just as Cameron Crowe went undercover to write the book, Jason Leigh did her own version of field research to prepare for Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Cast as 15-year-old Stacey Hamilton, Leigh wanted her performance to feel as authentic as possible. To get into character, she spent time hanging around Southern California malls and high schools, quietly observing how real teenagers interacted, talked, and carried themselves. Leigh was already in her 20s at the time, so blending in required some effort.
No, they're like variables that I might not be good at. Like what variables?
But her dedication helped her capture the vulnerability and naivety of her character. The result was a performance that grounded the film, giving it an emotional core amidst the laughs. Leigh's undercover prep work echoed Crowe's original reporting, further blurring the line between the real teenagers of Ridgemont High and their on-screen counterparts. If you're enjoying this so far, hit that like button and subscribe for more awesome movie facts. And tell us in the comments, what movie brings you the most nostalgia, and which one should we cover next? Number 5. Nicolas Cage made his film debut in Fast Times. Before he became an Oscar-winning actor and one of Hollywood's most eccentric stars, Nicolas Cage made his big-screen debut in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. At the time, he was still Nicolas Coppola, the nephew of famed director Francis Ford Coppola. Hoping to avoid accusations of nepotism, he changed his name to Cage, inspired by comic book hero Luke Cage. In Fast Times, he appears in a small background role as Brad's Bud, one of Judge Reinhold's character's co-workers at the burger joint. Though he didn't have lines, Cage was eager to break into movies, and this brief part gave him his first official screen credit. Just a year later, he would start landing larger roles, beginning a career that would make him one of the most recognizable and unpredictable actors in Hollywood. Number 6. Nicolas Cage was the only teenager in the cast. Ironically, for a movie about high school life, almost none of the actors in Fast Times at Ridgemont High were actually teenagers. Most of the cast were in their late teens or early 20s, with some even older. The only actor under 18 was Nicolas Cage, who had just turned 17 during filming. Because he was legally a minor, Cage faced restrictions on the number of hours he could work each day, which made scheduling his scenes more complicated. This limitation also contributed to why his role remained so small. Meanwhile, Jason Leigh, who convincingly played a 15-year-old, was actually in her 20s. It's one of those classic Hollywood quirks. The movie that defined teenage cinema in the 80s was mostly populated by adults pretending to be teens, with Cage as the lone real one. Number 7. Sean Penn never auditioned for Spicoli. Sean Penn's performance as Jeff Spicoli, the laid-back stoner surfer, became one of the most iconic roles of the 1980s teen comedy boom. Surprisingly, he didn't even have to audition for the part. Director Amy Heckerling and producer Art Linson were already convinced Penn was perfect for the role after seeing his raw energy and charisma. Penn fully committed to the character from the start, arriving at rehearsals in full surfer mode and insisting on being called Spicoli both on and off set. His dedication was so complete that the cast and crew often joked they never really met Sean during the entire shoot.
Order the double cheese and sausage.
Right here, dude.
By skipping the audition process and diving headfirst into the role, Penn created a character who stole nearly every scene and became a permanent part of pop culture. Number 8. Sean stayed in character the whole shoot. Sean Penn's method acting on Fast Times at Ridgemont High became the stuff of legend. From the first day of filming to the last, he refused to break character as Jeff Spicoli, the perpetually stoned surfer. On set, he introduced himself only as Spicoli, signed notes to the director with Spicoli's name, and insisted his trailer be labeled that way. Cast and crew members recalled that Penn carried himself with Spicoli's slouch, voice, and hazy outlook at all times, blurring the line between actor and character. Even when cameras weren't rolling, he treated everyone as if he really was the clueless beach bum. The commitment paid off. Penn's performance became iconic, defining the film's comedic edge.
Really?
Sorry I'm late. It's just like this new schedule's totally confusing.
But for those working with him, it also meant they spent weeks dealing with Spicoli instead of Sean Penn. Number 9. Fast Times was Forest Whitaker's first film. Long before he won an Academy Award for The Last King of Scotland, 2006, Forest Whitaker made his big-screen debut in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. He played Charles Jefferson, a soft-spoken high school football star who tries to keep a low profile, until Sean Penn's Spicoli wrecks his prized Camaro. Though Whitaker's screen time was brief, his commanding presence stood out, even in a cast filled with future stars. For Whitaker, the role was the first step in a career that would span decades, with acclaimed performances in dramas, thrillers, and historical epics.
She is pissed off.
Looking back, it's striking to see such a serious actor begin in a teen comedy. Fast Times may have been about the trials of adolescence, but it also introduced audiences to a performer who would go on to become one of Hollywood's most respected talents. Number 10. Herman Munster thought it was too obscene. Not everyone was thrilled with Fast Times at Ridgemont High when it was released in 1982. Fred Gwynne, the actor best known as Herman Munster on the classic sitcom The Munsters, was originally offered a role in the film. After reading the script, however, Gwynne turned it down, calling it far too obscene. The movie's frank depictions of teenage sex, drug use, and profanity clashed with the wholesome image Gwynne had cultivated on television.
They sold their bodies to medicine for money. About $30, I think?
25.
His reaction reflected how controversial Fast Times was at the time, with some critics dismissing it as vulgar exploitation. Yet that raw honesty about high school life is exactly what helped the film connect with audiences and endure as a cult classic. While Gwynne walked away, his refusal only underscores how edgy the movie felt compared to most teen films of its era. Number 11. David Lynch was almost the director. Before Amy Heckerling landed her debut directing gig, Universal Studios considered a very different filmmaker for Fast Times at Ridgemont High, David Lynch. Fresh off the acclaim of Eraserhead and The Elephant Man, Lynch was beginning to establish himself as a director with a surreal, unsettling style. Studio executives approached him about helming Cameron Crowe's high school comedy, but Lynch ultimately passed. He later admitted that while he found the script interesting, he didn't feel it matched his sensibilities as a filmmaker. It's fascinating to imagine what a Lynch-directed Fast Times might have looked like, a mix of teenage hijinks and dreamlike strangeness. But it's clear the film benefited from Amy Heckerling's grounded, witty approach.
No towels, man.
Still, the near miss remains one of the strangest what-ifs in 1980s teen movie history. Number 12. Bruce Springsteen's sister has a cameo. Among the many future stars and quirky cameos in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, one that often slips under the radar is connected to the boss himself. Bruce Springsteen's sister, Pamela Springsteen, appears briefly in the movie. At the time, Pamela was pursuing an acting career and picked up small roles in films throughout the 1980s. In Fast Times, her cameo is easy to miss, but fans of the Springsteen family often point it out as a fun bit of trivia. Pamela later gained a cult following of her own by starring in 2 of the Sleepaway Camp horror sequels, where she played the infamous Angela Baker. While her brother was dominating stadiums with rock anthems, Pamela was quietly carving out her own space on screen, starting with this blink and you'll miss it appearance in Fast Times. Number 13. No original music was written for the film. Unlike many teen comedies of the 1980s that relied on original songs to boost their soundtracks, Fast Times at Ridgemont High didn't feature any music written specifically for the movie. Instead, the filmmakers leaned heavily on a mix of existing tracks and licensed songs from popular artists of the era. The soundtrack became a huge part of the film's identity, with songs like Jackson Browne's Somebody's Baby and the Go-Go's We Got the Beat, perfectly capturing the California high school vibe. The lack of original music didn't hurt. In fact, it made the film feel more grounded, as if the characters were living in the same world as the audience. Over time, the soundtrack became as iconic as the film itself, a time capsule of early 80s pop and rock that still resonates with fans today. Number 14. The cast included friends and lovers of the filmmakers. Director Amy Heckerling and writer Cameron Crowe weren't shy about filling Fast Times at Ridgemont High with familiar faces from their personal lives. Several small parts were played by friends, acquaintances, and even romantic partners of the filmmakers. It gave the production a looser, more authentic feel, as if the high school world was populated not just by actors, but by people who genuinely belonged in that environment.
Something happened to him, Mom. No shirt, no shoes, no dice.
For Crowe especially, whose script was based on real people he'd observed while undercover, this choice blurred the line between reality and fiction even further. Many of these extras and bit players are barely noticeable, but their presence added texture to the hallways, classrooms, and mall scenes. It was a small but deliberate move that made Fast Times feel more lived in than most teen comedies of its era. Number 15. The characters' fates were almost left open-ended. At the end of Fast Times at Ridgemont High, audiences get a light-hearted epilogue that tells us what happened to each of the main characters, from Spicoli winning a surfing contest to Brad managing a convenience store. But director Amy Heckerling originally wanted to leave their futures unresolved. Her vision was to simply end the story at graduation, letting the characters drift into adulthood without neat labels or comedic wrap-ups. The idea was meant to reflect real life, where teenagers don't instantly get tidy resolutions. Ultimately, the studio pushed for the "Where are they now?" captions, believing audiences would enjoy a more traditional payoff, while the epilogue became a memorable part of the film. It's interesting to imagine Heckerling's original plan, a more ambiguous ending that left viewers wondering where these kids might really end up. Number 16. Tom Hanks was considered for Brad Hamilton. Judge Reinhold ultimately landed the role of Brad Hamilton, the good-natured older brother with a string of part-time jobs and a lot of teenage frustration. But before Reinhold was cast, the filmmakers considered another actor who was far from a household name at the time, Tom Hanks. In the early 1980s, Hanks was best known for his TV sitcom Bosom Buddies and had yet to break out on the big screen. Producers saw potential in him, but he wasn't quite the right fit for Brad. Reinhold got the part instead and delivered one of the film's most memorable performances. Ironically, just 2 years later, Hanks would become a star with Splash, 1984, launching a career that would eventually make him one of Hollywood's most beloved and respected actors. Number 17. Matthew Broderick and Justine Bateman turned it down. Casting Fast Times at Ridgemont High could have looked very different. Before Phoebe Cates made Linda Barrett unforgettable, the part was offered to Justine Bateman. At the time, Bateman was just starting out and chose to commit to the sitcom Family Ties instead, a decision that paid off with years of steady work and fame. On the other side of the casting board, Matthew Broderick was approached to play Jeff Spicoli. He declined, opting to pursue other opportunities. Within a few years, he would land his own iconic teen role as Ferris Bueller in 1986. In hindsight, both actors made smart choices, but it's fascinating to imagine how different Fast Times might have felt with Bateman in the red bikini or Broderick mumbling surfer slang as Spicoli. Number 18. Fast Times was a sleeper hit. When Fast Times at Ridgemont High was released in 1982, Universal didn't have much confidence in it. Director Amy Heckerling later recalled that the studio barely advertised the movie and gave it only a limited release, expecting little box office traction. But the film quickly proved them wrong. On its opening weekend, Fast Times earned back nearly half of its modest $5 million budget. Impressed by the numbers and the buzz, Universal expanded it to a wide release. Word of mouth spread fast, especially among young audiences who connected with its mix of raunchy humor and honesty about high school life. By the end of its run, the movie had grossed $27.1 million domestically, far surpassing expectations and cementing its place as a cult favorite of the 1980s. Number 19. Fast Times was turned into a TV show. After the surprise success of Fast Times at Ridgemont High, television executives tried to bring the story to the small screen. In 1986, CBS launched a sitcom adaptation simply titled Fast Times. The show followed the same characters from the film, but almost none of the original cast returned. The only holdovers were Ray Walston reprising his role as the stern Mr. Hand and Vincent Schiavelli as the eccentric Mr. Vargas. Amy Heckerling even returned to direct and co-write 3 episodes, hoping to carry over some of the film's spirit. Despite those efforts, the series never found an audience. It lasted just 7 episodes before being canceled. Today, the show is mostly forgotten, remembered only as a curious attempt to extend the life of a cult classic that worked far better on the big screen. Number 20. A Fast Times reunion came quickly. Just a few years after the film's release, the cast of Fast Times at Ridgemont High reunited for a television special. Sean Penn, Judge Reinhold, Jennifer Jason Leigh, and Phoebe Cates reflected on the movie's unexpected cult success. For fans, it was an early celebration of how a modest teen comedy had already become iconic. And that's 20 shocking facts about Fast Times at Ridgemont High. From undercover reporting to breakout debuts, this teen comedy was filled with surprises both on and off screen. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments which classic movie you'd like us to cover next.